What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hello, AVAIYA family. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner Ike Allen and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Heather Monroe, is back with us today to talk about the myths of forgiveness. Heather is an integrative psychotherapist who specializes in the healing of relational trauma. Through her extensive training and work in clinical and experiential modalities, Heather guides clients through a holistic and transformative process. Her approach to helping people is creative, open, and flexible, as she understands that just as the context of trauma is individual, so is the process of healing. Welcome back to AVAIYA, Heather.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back with all of you.
Yeah, so happy to have you back. And I love your topic today. Such an important thing to be talking about as it relates to people having gone through betrayal trauma. So why do you think it's so hard for people to forgive?
Well, I think that just like betrayal is individualized, the type of betrayal and our process through that betrayal, what's going to make it hard for one person to forgive is going to be different than for another person to forgive. So I think part of the process is figuring out, why is it hard for you to forgive, particularly, what makes it difficult for you as an individual to forgive. And I believe as a whole, people have certain myths about forgiveness, whether they're conscious of them or not conscious of them. That's one part of it. And I also believe that forgiveness is really elusive. Like there's no how to guide. It just feels like this thing that we need to do, but it's like, where's the roadmap? I don't, and the process is super human, messy, sticky, painful, joyful. Like there's all this humanity in the process of forgiveness. And it's really hard for us to tolerate humanity, our own humanity and another person's humanity. And so forgiveness invites us to grow our window of tolerance for both of those, for ourselves and for this other person. And I think that's what makes it so tremendously difficult.
Yeah. Oh, well said. Yes. Difficult for us to tolerate humanity. There it is.
Yeah.
Yep. It's so true.
The bowels of humanity.
Yeah, that is so well said. Yeah. And so let's talk a little bit about, before we get into myths of forgiveness, right? Are there different kinds of forgiveness based on, I guess, different kinds of betrayals, or like, how does that work?
Yeah. So there's a little bit of research done around this. There are two different types of forgiveness that I really focus on. There's the decisional forgiveness, which is I'm just deciding, I'm cognitively in my mind deciding to forgive this person. And so let's say it is an infidelity. And so I am just going to decide that we are going to move forward in this marriage and I'm going to forgive this person. And we're almost like willing it to happen in our minds. And so that's going to take consistent, conscious efforts in reframing our thoughts around it, but also like holding our tongue, creating the decision in our thought process. And what the problem with that decisional forgiveness is that it kind of comes out in all these, it leaks, like our resentment and anger, they kind of leak out on all these different passive aggressive ways, because like we logically want to, we're deciding to, we're still in the marriage, we're still in the relationship, whatever it is, the partnership. And we're thinking that the behavior of continuing to be in that partnership is the forgiveness piece. Then there's this other piece of forgiveness, which is emotional forgiveness. And that is a much more, well, it has a lot more sticking power. That's a cleaner, in the end, it's the cleaner way to forgive. The other issue with decisional forgiveness is that you may be behaving as if by staying, right? Or behaving as if by holding your tongue, behaving as if by going about it, as if it never happened, or, continuing to interact with that person the way that you used to, but your body is still harboring that energy of anger, resentment, rage, all those things that come with being betrayed. And that is going to create unwellness in our minds and bodies as well. Mm-hmm. Emotional forgiveness is the stickier, messier, and yet the path of true freedom. And that's emotional forgiveness. And emotional forgiveness is when those negative emotions like resentment, rage, negativity, those uncomfortable emotions are replaced with peace, calmness, maybe even gratitude, perspective, serenity, happiness, meaning, those kind of things. And so I always tell clients, we can't just eliminate one thing without replacing it with another. And I also don't believe that anything the goal should never be to eliminate. It should just make it right-sized so that we can thrive. We can thrive despite its presence in our life, so that we can thrive despite the fact that we hold a sadness, despite the fact that we hold grief, despite the fact that we still feel anger. And it's not about survival anymore.
Yeah, that's another beautiful way of putting that, right? It's not just getting rid of basically the experience you have had. Yes, but yes, it's a smaller amount. It's sitting in the background, perhaps, not like affecting you as much anymore, I would imagine.
It's integrated. It's like, there's this part of me, but I am not that part.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's a great way of putting it. And I'm curious too, right? We just talked about these two different, types of forgiveness as it related to your example, right? Of infidelity and like a couple staying together. And right, there's obviously people who decide to not stay together. Someone has been betrayed, they decide to leave the relationship, but then there's also the forgiveness piece there. Anything like specific you'd want to talk about that, so that person's not necessarily going to stay in a relationship with this other person, but they still might harbor that resentment and that anger and have physical consequences because of that. Any thoughts for those people?
Yeah, I mean, completely. So now I would for both of those people, now we have to get into what are the components of emotional forgiveness? Like, how do we get to emotional forgiveness? What are the stages? And I can go into what I believe those stages are if you want me to.
That would be great.
So one of the things that keeps us from moving forward is always going back in time of like, what did I do wrong? What did that person do wrong? We're like replaying the tape. And when we replay the tape, our bodies re-experience the trauma all over again. So a really important thing I always, try to remember myself in my life and try to also tell my clients is that the brain, the mind literally doesn't know the difference between the thought and the experience. And so when we're having those thoughts, we are back in that experience. And when we're back in that experience, we are no longer in acceptance. So acceptance is that number one first step is like, this happened. This happened. And like letting that land. It's not about the who's and the whys. It's like, and it still happened. And it happened. Because when we go back to like replay and what could we have done, we're not in acceptance. It's like we're replaying a powerlessness that we continue to have in the present moment by revisiting the past. So the first part of getting to the emotional forgiveness is just an acceptance around what happened and letting go of the replays, and what I do is it's a mindfulness practice. It's gently bringing our minds back to the present moment. And we're here, and I'm here, and this happened, right? Doesn't matter how it happened, it did happen. So gently, mindfully bringing ourselves back to the present moment of where we are right now. The second is one of the harder ones, which is cultivating empathy for ourselves and also for the other person. And when we're looking at cultivating empathy for the other person, some ways that we can do that is by looking at where this person came from. Now, I'm looking at this from like betrayal and deception, kind of the topic of this. I would not, for instance, like guide a client towards this who was raped or like molested. We're not looking at those types of traumas. We're looking at the relational traumas of deception and betrayal. So looking at that, where this person came from, what are those person's wounds that might have, that allowed them to be so dishonest with themselves and then with you as a result of that dishonesty, as a result of them breaking their own integrity and then putting that on you. So realizing that that person has a story of their own and a past of their own, and just understanding like what that looks like for them and getting a bit of compassion around that, not of what they did to you, but just like, okay, I get it. Like this person's damage became my damage in a way. Untreated, hurt people kind of thing. Then there's an acknowledgement of where we were, like our role in the play out of the relationship. And in that acknowledgement, having compassion for ourselves, because nothing happens in a vacuum when it comes to relational trauma. Everything is a dance. Everything is a play. And as much as deception and betrayal feels like such a victimhood, it feels like such a slap in the face, literally, like I'm the victim of this person's actions. When we start to acknowledge like where we were at when all this was happening, not an acknowledgement of like our part in the betrayal, but just of like our part in not knowing, in not jumping on it, in not speaking up for ourselves, in allowing it to keep going on, even though we had like a gut feeling that maybe this was happening, all of that stuff, acknowledging that in us, and then bringing forth that empathy again, like towards ourselves, and understanding why we don't speak up, what's in our past that keeps our voice down here, why we, our fears of abandonment, our fears of rejection, maybe, and bringing that empathy and compassion again back to ourselves. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. Beautifully said. I love it. So acceptance, empathy, acknowledgement of our role.
Acknowledgement of our role. And then with that, and again, this is a non-linear process, then we have to maybe go back to acceptance for a month and then go back to the acknowledgement of us and the empathy around our humanity and that other person's humanity. But at some point in this process, we come to start, and we do this with all trauma. This is one of the things that, that is hardwired in our brains as human. One of the ways that we can tolerate trauma, relational trauma, is finding meaning. It's like one of the ways that we look to make sense of things as humans, is we want to find meaning. And so with the passing of time, with these passing of negative emotions replaced by compassion, acknowledgement, acceptance, a sense of understanding, there starts to become this meaning that enters the room, that enters the healing room, where we start to look at what does that mean in my life? Like, what is the meaning of betrayal for me? And what did that betrayal mean to me? What did it take from me? And what did I maybe gain from it? But create some meaning around the deception and the betrayal for ourselves. And lastly, when we get that sense of meaning and the acceptance and all those other things, and replacing it with the positive emotions over time, the energy around it becomes more neutral. Like we're really able to see it as if we step away and we're the observer of what happened to us. And when we can observe from a place of more neutrality in the emotions, we gain perspective. And it's in the gaining perspective that we're able to tell our story of betrayal, where it's just information.
Mm-hmm.
Like I get goosebumps every time I say that, because if you don't think about think about how you were 10 years ago and something you were struggling with 10 years ago. Might have been an addiction. It might have been a crazy love affair. It could have been heartache. And now think about it now. And if you think about it now and you've gotten to the place of perspective, if you look back at that person who broke your heart, it's just information. It's like, oh yeah, and then I was in this toxic relationship and this all happened, and I learned this and this and this from it. And it's kind of a neutral energy. And that is like kind of, yeah, where we want to be. We don't want it to become our identity where it is in the beginning. It's like, I was betrayed. Like, that's who I am. That's a huge part of my story. We want it to become, this is just a part of this big story that's me.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Oh my God. Love all that.